221 BC, 3674 AM. The Qin dynasty begins in China after all the warring provinces are unified under Emperor Qi Huangdi, known as China's first or universal emperor, a ruler having been king since 246 BC. Interestingly, this year was 1656 years after 1877 BC, when the Abrahamic Covenant was instituted. 219 BC, 3676 AM. A major Chinese naval expedition set out into the Pacific Ocean and never returned. The last time this occurred from China was in 1123 BC, when 250,000 Chinese sailed to ancient America 904 years earlier. The exact dates of the 1123 BC departure is unknown, only that they left in haste because of a war and change of dynasty. 900 years is 10,800 months. This was 1680 years after the Babel dispersion in 1899 BC, when people first arrived in the Far East, and this is also the 324th year of the Buddhist calendar that began in 543 BC. 1. Hitchhiker's Guide to Armageddon. 218 BC, 3677 AM. The Second Punic War was initiated by Carthage, when Hannibal of Carthage with 50,000 troops and 37 war elephants sailed to Spain, passing his army over the Ebro River, Hebrew River, which was considered an act of war by Rome, who controlled the territory. After attacking the Roman holdings, Hannibal marched his army over the Alps, losing many men and 36 of the 37 elephants due to the severe cold weather. In northern Italy, Hannibal allied himself to the Cisalpine Gauls, or Celts, and many joined his ranks against their Roman enemies. He carried on the Second Punic War for 15 years on Roman soil, the war itself being 18 years long. Every Roman army that opposed him was defeated, but without siege equipment he could not take Rome. The conflict was called Punic Wars because this was the Latin rendering for Phoenician, a people who founded Carthage. This history of the North African Roman War had already occurred 1260 years before in 1478 BC. This history of the North African Roman War had already occurred 1260 years before in 1478 BC, when Hannibal, origin of Hannibal, of northern Africa, invaded Italia of the Chittim, pre-Roman Italy, and remained for 18 years fighting the local Chittim. The entire episode a repeat of this historic invasion, as recorded in the Book of Jasher. This year of the Punic invasion was 72 years before the Romans in 146 BC would completely defeat and destroy Carthage. Of interest is the calendrical fact that this invasion against Rome was 1229 years after the Israelites escaped Africa in 1447 BC in the Exodus, and in 1229 BC the Roman ancestors, the Trojans, were invaded by the Danaan and Proto-Greek peoples in the Trojan War, the Danaan being early Danites or Israelites, many whom settled among the Phoenicians and Carthaginians. 217 BC, 3678 AM. During the Second Punic War, there were 57 earthquake tremors felt at Rome in this year alone. This occurred in the 5th year of the passing of the Romanid Apocalypse Comet Group. Because of growing fears of Hannibal as he terrorized the Roman countryside, the Roman Senate officially consulted the books of the Sibyl, the ancient Hebrew prophetess college. This was the last official Roman consultation of the books. 1. Pliny Natural History, Universe and the World. 2. The Oxford Illustrated Companion to. 216 BC, 3679 AM. Hannibal led his army with an army of Gauls against a Roman army and defeated them in the Battle of Cannae. Also in this year, an army of Gauls, the Boii, trapped a Roman army and slaughtered them. Their Roman leader Lucius Postumius was decapitated, and the Gauls turned his skull into a gold-gilt drinking cup. Julius Obsequens wrote that in this year, objects like ships were seen passing through the skies over Italy, and a round shield, comet or platoid, was seen, the sky on fire. The Punic War is interesting because here we have the contact of allies involving two distinct branches of Israelites. The Phoenicians absorbed into their population those Israelites that migrated in antiquity in the 13th to 9th centuries BC, and the Gauls were descended from Cimmerians, Scythians, that were in turn Israelites deported into northern Assyria in 745 and 721 BC. In the year 1584 BC, North African armies attacked Italia, this being 1368 years earlier, or 684 plus 684 years. This same number in months is 132 years, and 132 years before this date was 348 BC, when Roman Carthage entered a trade alliance with Carthage, gaining the advantage. This year was 180 years after the Etruscan city of Veii fell to the Romans, after 10 years of war in 396 BC. Lastly, this was 70 years before the Romans would totally defeat and destroy Carthage in 146 BC. 1. The Philosopher and the Druid. 2. God's Veden, Brambly. 215 BC, 3680 AM. During the Second Punic War, historians attest at that time it rained blood. The Romanid Apocalypse comet group was still passing through the inner solar system. The rain of blood was something widely recorded around the world in ancient times, with incidents that will be revealed all the way up to the 19th century AD. There is a vast amount of reddish frozen mud orbiting the Sun in strewn fields that Earth occasionally passes through, causing the blood rain events. Hannibal and the Gauls pushed back the Romans and laid waste to the entire country, excepting Rome. This was 666 years after the founding of the Israelite capital city of Samaria, origin for Cimmerian, and exactly 690 years before 476 AD, when the Germans finally defeated and took Rome, the sum of 690 being 138 times 5, 138 being the orbital length of Phoenix. This was 2898 years of the Mayan calendar and 2600 Anno Pyramid, or exactly 52 times 50 Jubilees. This is also the approximate date for when the Macedonian king of Egypt, Ptolemy IV, commissioned the Alexandris, the largest ship in the world at 450 feet long. She had a 57-foot beam and 57-foot long oars, carrying 400 officers and 2850 marines, requiring 4,000 rowers. Aboard, some quarters were luxurious, with hot baths, a full-sized kitchen galley, and a shrine to Poseidon, Greek god of the sea. The huge battleship was outfitted with catapults that could hurl 50-pound boulders. No doubt Ptolemy was inspired by the engineering genius of those who built the gigantic floating siege constructions for Demetrius and his son Gonatas earlier. The immense ship was a symbol of Egypt's wealth and power under the Macedonian rule, though it never had a chance to be used in any military campaigns. 200 years later, its hull was still afloat, docked in a Greek harbour. 1. Commentaries on the Occult Philosophy of Agrippa. 2. The Lost Treasure of King Juba.